good evening and welcome to the latest edition of the Living Legacy Project's 2024 webinar series. Our fall education series has been so exciting, and we are so happy to have you here tonight for yet another amazing presentation. And as usual, we're gonna begin with some songs. So I'm gonna ask you to just get yourself comfortable, get a nice drink or whatever you desire close to you, and join me in one of the powerful songs of the modern civil rights movement, Wade in the Water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, who with those children all dressed in red? God's gonna trouble the water. Must be the ones that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Say, who with those children all dressed in white? God's gonna trouble the water. They must be the ones getting ready to fly. God's gonna trouble the water. Children sing, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the... Sing it with me. Say, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, who are those children all dressed in blue? God's gonna trouble the water. They must be the ones that made it through. God's gonna trouble the water. Well, who are those children all dressed in red? God's gonna trouble the water. Must be the ones Bob Moses led. God's gonna trouble them. Water children say, wade in the water. Water children say, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water children now. Wade in the water. Wade, oh now children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble 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 the water. We will not rest till the storm is over. We will not lay this burden down. We will keep each other strong. We will love and carry on till we stand all together on solid ground. Greetings to all of you who are joining us tonight, many of you having joined us before. And tonight we are going to have a remarkable presentation. And we're going to sing another song, and then it'll be pretty much time to get to our program, which is going to really delight you tonight. We have had such an amazing time here at Living Legacy presenting these webinars. And of course, we mention all the time that these webinars and our work for freedom and justice, for election reform, and for education are all supported by your dollars and your great gracious donations. So as we continue to present these projects, we wish you to keep checking out our website and keep joining us as often as possible. And here's another song that the folks in the modern civil rights movement, all the way back to when folks were coming out of the time of slavery and beginning to take up their new citizenship, were singing a song that we are singing now in this time, because we realize that this coming election is certainly one of the most important in our lifetime. And it is an important time when we are trying desperately, just absolutely determinedly, to move the needle forward on justice. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom line. Ain't gonna let racism turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let racism turn me round. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let fear and ignorance turn me round. Oh, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let fear and ignorance turn me round. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up the freedom land. Well, you know, we keep marching, we keep walking, we keep working. And we remember, because we are in community working together, that we are not only working in struggle, but we are also working in joy. And here's another song that says, this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, so the world can't take it away. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, this joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, so the world can't take it away. This courage that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, this courage that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, this courage that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, so the world can't take it away. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, this love that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, so the world can't take it away. Well, these rights that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, these rights that I have, the world didn't give it to me. Oh, these rights that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, so the world can't take it away. Hey, no, the world didn't give it, so the world can't take it away. Well, thanks again for joining us tonight. And I'd like to introduce my colleague and our Director of Operations at the Living Legacy Project, Annette Marquis.
Thank you, Reggie. Isn't he the best? Just incredible. He's such a gift to us and to the world. Well, thank you so much, Reggie. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Living Legacy Project program, the fourth in our series about unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. I'm Annette Marquis, as Reggie said, Director of Operations for the Living Legacy Project. Our moderator tonight is the Reverend Dr. Gordon Gibson. Without Gordon, the Living Legacy Project would not exist. He was our inspiration way back in the early days when he and his wife Judy first took a group of people to those places in Mississippi and Alabama that he kept telling stories about. Now, 20 years later, Gordon is still taking people on what we now call pilgrimages to see the places and, most importantly, to meet the people who were instrumental in the civil rights movement, people like tonight's guest. The Living Legacy Project conducts pilgrimages to deepen participants' understanding of the movement by visiting the sites where it happened, talking with people who lived it, and exploring what these stories teach us about the work that still needs to be done today. With us tonight is one of those incredible people, Dr. Gwendolyn Zoharah Simmons. We're so honored to have her here with us in person. Tonight's program will last about an hour, and afterwards, you can join us in a Zoom meeting to ask questions and engage in a more relaxed conversation with our guest. The link will be provided in the chat by Pam Zappardino, a member of the LLP board and our chat manager this evening. Thank you, Pam. You can also find the link in the email you received about the program earlier today or when you registered. Now join me in welcoming Gordon Gibson, who will introduce tonight's guest.
I am delighted that you're here. Our guest tonight is somebody I've enjoyed talking with over months. We have never had a boring conversation. And just it doesn't seem to be possible for us. And I think you'll quickly understand what I'm talking about. Zoharah Simmons is a former worker for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, really the core of many crucial battles in the civil rights movement. Former worker for the American Friends Service Committee for over 20 years, almost a quarter century, but not a standard sort of person. This is somebody who was a college dropout. There are a lot of them, but most college dropouts don't go back 20 years later, finish their BA, earn an MA, and get a PhD. It doesn't work that way. So she is now Professor Emerita at the University of Florida in areas of African American religions and Islamic studies. She's also a founding member of the National Council of Elders. She's a board member of the SNCC Legacy Project, and just a fascinating human being who is currently sitting in the path of the next hurricane. So, Zoharah, I have loved our conversations, and it's going to be fun to have some other people listening in tonight. But I've talked about the latter parts of your life. Let's go back early. Let's start where it started. As a little girl, you grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, a city just across the Mississippi River from Arkansas and just across the state line from Mississippi. And I think we need a little background on your family, particularly your grandmother, who's, according to you, a really major part of it. So tell us about that part of your life.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Living Legacy Project, for bringing me on to share some of my experiences as a civil rights, human rights, peace activist. And
Yes.
as Gordon has said, I think we spent 2 hours yesterday preparing for this. And we had already spent hours earlier. So thank you so much. Yes, I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and at the age of 3, when my parents separated, my grandmother brought me to live with her. I was still very, very connected to my parents. In fact, my father moved in a few years later. And so I literally grew up in the house with him, and my mom was not far away. And I spent many weekends with her. But Rhoda, Bell, Temple, Hudson, Douglas, that was my grandmother. And I am so grateful that she took the burden on of rearing me. And she was an amazing, amazing woman in her own right. She had been a sharecropper in Arkansas. Her parents both died when she was quite young. And so she spent lots of time with her maternal grandmother. And the maternal grandmother, Lucy Goldsby, had been an enslaved person. And so my grandmother, unlike many people, told me all the stories about the enslavement period that her grandmother had told her. And often from the time that I can really remember, when I was 6 years old and helping my grandmother with quilting and all the crafts that she engaged in and taught me how to do, even though I've lost all those arts now. But, but she would tell me the stories of Grandma Lucy, and she would cry. And even though I didn't understand, I would cry because she was crying. So I was given this backdrop, and I'd go to school and ask my classmates, did you know about your great grandparents being enslaved? And they'd say, no, I don't know anything about that. So, many people did not share this kind of information with their children. But my grandmother was insistent that I was going to get a college education. She had wanted my dad to get it. She had wanted my Aunt Jessie to get it. And they said, nope, college isn't for me. And so she said, you, you are going to do this. And it was never any question in my mind about that. But she had also, told me about Mississippi as being the worst place in the United States for a Black person. So she had terrified me already about Mississippi, you know, prior to even any thought of going there, as I did later in my teens. So she was a person who had registered to vote as soon as women got the right to vote, and she was very proud of it. She went around in the neighborhood knocking on doors, begging people to register to vote. She and my granddad went to any kinds of meetings related to people who wanted to run for office. Now, these were all white people because Black people could not run. They could vote, but they could not run for office. And so they would come to the Black community, to our churches, and say what they were going to do for us good colored people. We voted for them. And my grandmother and granddad were on the front seat asking questions and all. So she, she would not admit that she had laid the foundation for my civil rights activism, that she's so opposed, because for her it meant I wasn't going to get that college education that she wanted me so badly to have.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yesterday we were remembering probably your first act of disobedience. It was at the end of what a children's book author might call an awful, terrible, very bad day. Uh, yeah, I think let's share about that.
Yes, well, let me just go back a minute to for particularly anybody who's, young, and I found this when I was teaching, that even down here in Florida, our students, they had no understanding of Jim Crow and the
No.
Jim Crow system. So, and of course, when I grew up, I had very little interaction outside of the Black community because, everything was segregated. And at the end of my junior year, thinking about going to college, and, everybody was poor, it was a working class family. And I was certainly hoping to get a scholarship, but I knew that the scholarships didn't cover everything. So I wanted to get a job and make some money that summer. And I was looking in our newspapers, and there were all these jobs that I knew I was qualified for, clerks, secretarial work, etc. And they were all in the white community. So this was my first foray into sort of midtown Memphis, having cut out all of these little job announcements. They needed somebody who could type or shorthand. And I had taken a commercial course in addition to the academic course in preparing for hopefully getting a job while I was in college. And so when I walked into these places, I walked up and said, "I'm here about the job." And I had it cut out. And, the shock and awe that I was received with was like, what? These jobs are not for colored girls. That's if they were being nice. Some of them use the N word. These are not for you. And so after about the third place where I had been really rudely pushed out of these establishments, I was standing outside wondering, should I go on? Because I had about 5 places when a torrential storm came down, and hadn't I didn't have a raincoat, I didn't have an umbrella. I was soaked to the bone and to the skin, certainly. And I decided to just go home. But I was really mad. I was so mad, and I was wet, and I had all my nice clothes and they were
Hmm.
ruined. So when I got on the bus, I sat down in the front seat, which it had never crossed my mind to sit on the front seat because I'd been brought up, you went to the back. And for Black people, you filled up from the black to the line in the center of the bus. And when that filled up, you stood up. So even if it was empty, and this was the case, there were no white people on the bus, there were Black people in the back. So when I sat down, the Black people were like alarmed. They were like, "What are you doing? Don't do that. Come on back here. Don't even try it." And the bus driver said, "Girl, you better get on back there where you belong." Well, I was so mad. I was not thinking about moving. And I just sat there glaring at him. We were glaring at each other. Well, then white people began to get on the bus. And they were so mad because it was so stupid. There were all these seats, but they couldn't sit down because they would be sitting in back of me, and they couldn't do that. So they were wet, dripping, standing over me, demanding that the bus driver throw me off, call the police, do something. And he didn't. I mean, I just said, the angels were taking care of me that day because he didn't throw me off. None of them attacked me, even though they were calling me bad names. And all the Black people in the back were saying, "Oh, God, have mercy. Jesus, have mercy." It was really pitiful. And I'm sitting there mad, ready to go to jail or whatever. And then, of course, this bus was the 31 Crosstown. So it went from the white community, the downtown, the white community into the Black community. So all the white people got off. They had stood the whole time. And then we get to the Black part of town, and the poor Black people were like, oh my God, we made it, kind of thing. So I get off at my stop, and then I go home and tell my grandmother what I've done. And I'm thinking she's going to be proud of me. She said, I ought to beat you. I mean, this is outrageous. What are you thinking? You could have been killed. You could have been jailed. Nothing. We couldn't have done anything. Don't you think about doing anything like that again. So that was my big foray on my own with challenging the Jim Crow system there in Memphis, Tennessee, and live to survive and tell the story.
Yes, it's sort of a prelude to the rest of your life.
Prelude, exactly.
Yeah. So you were a good kid, a good student, and you were just not just admitted to college, you were admitted and got a scholarship where you wanted to go. Fill us in on the significance of Spelman College.
Yes. Well, Spelman College, I had heard of. As it turned out, the minister of our church, we called them pastors back then. The senior pastor was a Morehouse graduate, and his wife was a Spelman graduate. Our family doctor, who had gone to Morehouse and Meharry, his daughter, both of his daughters had gone to Spelman, one of whom was a doctor, and the other one was an opera singer who lived in Europe because, she couldn't sing and make a living at it in the States, but she would come every year and put on a full operatic concert at our church. And so I was like, these three women, whom I looked up to. And of course, I knew of others who had gone to Spelman. And I knew that was my first choice, even though I had applied to other schools, including Howard, and I had gotten scholarships. But when the one came through from Spelman, that was the one. I was elated. And I was so thankful that my grandmother, who had to fight my dad and my mother, who said, she can go to school right here in Memphis. We got good schools here. There's Lemoyne College. She doesn't need to go off. We won't know what she's up to, etc. She said, oh no, she's going. She earned this. So she, made a way for me with them. And off we went to Spelman, and I was over the moon, as they say. And at my school, there were, teachers who had gone to Spelman, as well as male teachers who had gone to Morehouse, and everybody was so excited for me. And of course, the church, everybody was just elated. And so it was so wonderful to be going to the school that I had only dreamed of going to.
Uh, that's a great feeling when an institution says, "Yes, you're the kind of person we
Right.
want to have." But your grandmother had some clear instructions about what you were to do and what you were to not do.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I think Find a Baptist Church was high on the list,
Absolutely.
and
And join.
and you found one,
Yes. Yes.
but
I'm sorry.
it just happened. Well, you tell the story.
Okay. Well, interestingly, I made a good friend who was also a freshman. from Alabama, and she invited me to go to her church with her. Well, it wasn't her church, it was her sister's church. And she said, my sister's married to the minister, the pastor of the church. And I said, oh, okay, that'll be wonderful. So off we went. It was only about not even 3 full blocks from the campus. It was the West Hunter Street Baptist Church, and it looked very much like the church I had grown up in, and I was so excited. And there was her brother-in-law, Ralph David Abernathy. Now, unbelievably, I did not know that name. I didn't associate him with Montgomery bus boycott. I only knew Dr. King's name and Rosa Parks, but not Ralph David Abernathy. But as it was, there he was, and I loved the church, and I went a couple of times with her, and then I joined. And so, as it turned out, it was a movement church, and they were preaching a movement gospel every Sunday. So that was, something, because here's my grandmother, her last words to me when she and my mother and stepdad left me. They spent a few days there in Atlanta. It was, do not get involved. And she had the nerve to call it this mess. I mean, do you hear me? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, that's not why we brought you here. We didn't bring you here for this. So you better promise me you're not going to get involved. And I promised, and I really meant it. I wasn't just saying something to hear myself talk, but here I am at the West Hunter Street Baptist Church, and it wasn't too long before Dr. King is sitting there in the pulpit as the guest minister for that particular summer. And I'm like in awe. Oh my God, this is Dr. King. So that was the first, shall we say, hole in the promise that had been made. That I was not getting involved. These people were steadily tearing down that wall.
Yeah. Well, some other things happened to you. The the SNCC workers who kept trying to entice and the college didn't, if I'm recalling the story correctly, the college didn't serve an evening meal on Sunday. So you'd be hungry, but there was this Mennonite house that, so, what were some of those factors that came into play?
Yeah. Well, yes, definitely. The Mennonite house, looking for dinner on a Sunday, and for many of my sisters there at Spelman, they had more money than I did. And so we were permitted to go out to eat at a restaurant, but, my pennies were few. And so I certainly couldn't do that. And someone, I don't even know who told me about the Mennonite house, and I'd never even heard of a Mennonite. I didn't even know what that was. But they said, yeah, it's a really nice place, and you can go there and they serve a wonderful dinner and you have conversation. And I said, oh, okay, I'll do that. Well, as it turned out, Vincent Harding and Rose Marie Harding were the directors of the Mennonite House. And it was my first time meeting them. And, I loved them immediately. They were just so warm and welcoming. And not only were there students, not anybody else from Spelman that I can recall, but there were some students from Morehouse that were there, as well as ITC, the Interdenominational Theological Seminary. But for me, quite shockingly, there were white students there from Emory, University and from Georgia Tech. And so this was big table that we all sat and ate. And this was just a wonderful experience. And of course, Vincent, in his just amazing way, was always directing the conversation and asking the questions and all. So, and of course, promoting the civil rights movement. And he was working on his PhD. He was writing his dissertation during that time. And so, later, having used what became the text from his dissertation, he was, deep into the history of Black people fighting for their rights from the shores of Africa uh, onto, the civil rights era. And the other thing that was just so profound was Thornton Lynd, who I don't even know how I was chosen to be in an experimental class with Thornton Lynd, and it was an American history class, and it was combined with an American literature class. Esther Seaton was the teacher, and we had a 2-hour class. Half of it would be spent on American history, and the other half on the literature. And the what I was learning there was also just blowing my mind because, I don't think I even knew anything about Reconstruction, for example, or to know about the numerous slave revolts. And this was the material we were studying. And he also was promoting the civil rights movement. And he was a white Quaker man. He and Esther Seaton, who was Jewish, New York Jewish person, they were my first white instructors. And they were both radical civil rights activists. So, I was just, and you mentioned the SNCC people my age on campus every day haranguing us, to come to some demonstration that was going to be happening, etc. So, and inviting us to the SNCC office and all. So here I am trying to ignore all of this and stick to what I promised. And also, Spelman had told us in freshman orientation that if we got involved in the movement and they found out about it, we would lose our scholarship. So that was, a sword hanging over my head because I was only there because of the scholarship. So grandmother saying, don't you dare. Spelman saying, don't you dare. And yet I've got, Reverend Abernathy, I've got the SNCC people, I've got Thornton Lynd and Howard Zinn, who was teaching there. All of them just telling us this was the time to change the Jim Crow system, that it was now. So it was, I cried many a night trying to figure out what I was going to do. It was very painful to try to make that decision to go on that first demonstration. Yeah, it
But
was,
you finally,
oh yeah,
you finally did.
I did.
And you kept going.
Yes. Couldn't help myself. Um, Vincent Harding had a whole series that he did, and he would interview us. And out of those interviews came these booklets, and he gave a name for each of them. And in my case, it was Answering the Call. And so he said, you had to answer the call. You tried not to, but you had to. And he was right. I had to answer the call.
So ultimately, you were working with Stoughton Lynd as, I guess, part of a class project
Mhm,
advising freedom schools
mhm.
for the Mississippi Summer Project.
Yes. Yes, I began to hear about the plans for Mississippi summer uh, from Stoughton Lynn, as well as from all my new SNCC comrades. And this was my sophomore year. And, I knew I was in deep because each of the colleges across the South uh, were able to elect a representative, generally two, and from the center, what was it called? The Atlanta University Center, which included several colleges and as well as the AU Center. I permitted myself to be nominated to be one of those representatives from the AU Center and was elected. Well, at that point, I'm in deep because I and another dear brother who also went off to work full time in SNCC, Larry Fox. We were the two representatives. He was from Morehouse and I was from Spelman, which meant we actually went to the staff meetings. We could go to the staff meetings, and I literally met the Mississippi delegation, Bob Moses, and all of the incredible brothers and sisters who were laying the groundwork for Mississippi Freedom Summer. So I knew I just, wanted to go. Stoughton was very involved. Howard Zinn was very involved. Vincent was involved. It was like, everybody was so excited that we were going to take a nonviolent army into Mississippi of up to 1,000 students to show to the world what they were doing to Blacks in Mississippi who tried to register to vote. And this was so exciting to me, even though I was terrified at the thought of going to Mississippi to try to register Black people to vote. But and Stoughton was working with SNCC staff on creating the curriculum for the Freedom Schools. Freedom Summer had three main components. One was organizing the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Two, trying to get Black people registered to vote, but everybody knew that we weren't going to have much luck. So the idea was also to have mock, MOCK, voter registration drives all across the state where people could go to churches and barbershops and beauty shops and places that we set up where they could literally register to vote. And of course, of the Freedom Schools. So these were the three components. And I worked with Dr. Lynn as a project uh, for the class on working on developing the curriculum for the Freedom Schools. And I knew I wanted to be a Freedom School teacher.
But, as it turned out, what was it? The morning after your last exam.
Yes. Yes. Yes, indeed. Of course, I thought I had kept everything secret from, my grandmother and my mom and dad. But of course, I had told some of my college friends that I was going to Mississippi. I was so excited about it. And word got back to the dean of students, and the dean called my grandmother and said, I don't know if you know, but your granddaughter is planning to go to Mississippi with these SNCC people. And I didn't know any of this was going on behind my back, right? But as you said, after I had taken my last exam, that morning, the next day, they timed it. Mrs. Gordon, our house mother, knocked on my door at 6 a.m. in the morning telling me I had guests. Well, that was a no. You didn't have any guests at 6 a.m. in the morning. And I was like, what? She woke me up, But my grandmother said, it's me, Gwen. It's your grandmother. I was like, God, no. this cannot be, because I wasn't planning on going home. I was going to stay with the lenses until time to go for the orientation. So Miss Gordon had the key. She unlocked the door. My grandmother stormed in. She said, I heard you getting ready to do something that's stupid, foolish. You going to Mississippi to get killed, and I'm not having it. Pack your stuff, we're leaving. So we did leave. I mean, it was no way I could tell my grandmother no. And so off we went, and she tried her best to keep me locked up there in Memphis. So it was really, I can laugh about it now, but I was not tickled in the least. Neither was she.
Yeah.
And my father was backing her up. And of course, I'm making frantic calls to the SNCC office collect, saying, I don't have any money. You got to send me money for a bus ticket. I'm coming if y'all send the money. Well, my grandmother intercepted the first money order. She said, I got it. Yes, I'm not letting those people take your life. So then I called back to Jim Foreman and say, don't send it in my name and don't send it to my house. You have to send it in my girlfriend's name to her house. And she, of course, got it and cashed it and bought me a one-way ticket on the Greyhound bus. And so when there was a stand down, and I said, I'm going. I'm 19. I'm grown. I'm going. So, and my grandmother said, if you leave, don't ever come back. Now that was
That was
that
hard.
was a blow. That was a big blow. But I got on the Greyhound and cried all the way to Atlanta. And there was Thornton and Alice Lynn to meet me at the Greyhound bus stop. And they could tell I had been crying, them and their two little kids. And they said, we're your family now. I was like, right, okay. So that was the beginning of the journey to Mississippi.
Yeah. Well, you were going to be in charge of the Freedom School in Laurel, Mississippi.
Yes,
Didn't quite work out that way.
it did not. And let's just mention, who had ever heard of Laurel, Mississippi? I'm thinking I'm going to Hattiesburg, Meridian, Greensboro. I mean, not Greensboro, Greenwood. I mean, I met all these, wonderful SNCC workers from these cities. So when I'm called in to be given my assignment, and they said, we're sending you with two other men to Laurel, Mississippi. And I said, I never heard of it. And they said, well, we don't have a project there. You're going to have to start it. And I was like, what? And they said, and it's too dangerous to send any white people. So it's you, Jimmy Garrett, and Lester McKinney, because it's very dangerous there. And I just, it was like somebody had kicked me in the stomach. I was like, too dangerous, because I just thought the only way any of us will survive this is because the majority of the volunteers were white. And prior to the three civil rights martyrs, I had assumed that the Mississippi people would not kill white people. I had already found out that was not the case, but that's what it kept me thinking, oh, maybe we'll survive, because 1,000 people, 95% of them white, they're not going to kill white people. So then they tell me they're sending me to Laurel. There is no project, and you've got to create one. I thought, this is so unfair. I mean, I don't know anything about creating a project, but they said, well, Lester's going to be the project director. He's been there. He knows Jones County, etc. Well, that was a little relief, but the three of us were even unable to go directly to Laurel. We had to go to Hattiesburg to sleep overnight and then drive back the 30 miles north. to Laurel with a list of people who were members of the NAACP to see if anybody wanted a summer project there in Laurel. So that's what we were doing, the three of us going to Laurel to knock on doors to see if any of the NAACP people had heard about the project and whether they wanted it or not.
Yeah. And then 2 days in, the person who was going to be the project director disappeared.
Yes, let me just back up a little bit. One of the people's names on my list, our list, was a woman named Mrs. Eberta Spinks. And the guys said, you go knock on the door, you're a girl, and they might open the door for you. Whereas if, the two guys
Yeah.
show up, they're not going to open the door, So I knock on this door, and Mrs. Spinks opens the door, and she, says, may I help you? Well, I'm stumbling around trying to figure out, how do I ask her, do you want a project and are you willing to put some of us up? Now, they may burn your house down. They could fire you from a job if you have one, or even something worse could happen to you. I mean, I still hadn't figured out how you ask somebody that. So I'm stumbling and stammering. And she says, she's looking at me because I had an afro, which was unusual. And I had the blue jeans, which, women didn't wear back then unless you were SNCC, and a blue jean jacket. And she looked me up and down and she said, are you one of those freedom riders? Well, I wasn't a freedom rider, but the freedom part, yes. And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, I've been waiting on you all my life. And she was in her 50s. And she said, come on in. So that was the beginning of the Laurel Project. And she says, I heard something about it. What you need? I said, well, there are three of us and we need somewhere to stay. And she said, well, you can stay here. And my neighbor across the street, I'm going to call her, and she has more room in her house and she lives alone. She can put the two guys up. I mean, just like that. And she said, bring your bags. I said, they're down in Hattiesburg. She said, well, y'all go back and get your bags and come on. So we went back to Hattiesburg, got our stuff, and drove back to Laurel. Well, it might have been in that first week that we were getting set up and everything, trying to get the lay of the land. Mrs. Spinks is calling people saying, the Freedom Riders are here. She insisted on calling us Freedom Riders. She said, we got to make way for these children are here to help us get our freedom. I mean, she was incredible. But then he disappears, Lester. Well, remember, this is after Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney. So clearly, when somebody doesn't show up, you think the worst. So I'm calling Jackson, which was headquarters for the summer project. I'm calling Atlanta. They're calling the Justice Department, the FBI. It took a couple of days before we learned that he had been arrested on an outstanding warrant that he had not told anybody about. And they said, either you leave Jones County for 5 years and don't come back, or you're going to do 5 years at Parchment Penitentiary. Well, what a choice. He left. And that left Jimmy Garrett and me. Jimmy was from California, had never set foot in the South before in his life. And he's 19, I'm 19. And he's like, what we going to do, Gwen? I said, I don't know. And then SNCC calls me and said, well, you're the project director now. I was like, you got to be kidding me. You better send somebody here and send somebody here fast. I don't think about being a project director. They said, we don't have anybody to send. You're from the South. You've been to jail. Those are the prerequisites. Y'all y'all are out of your minds. So they said, look, you can do it. And I told Miss Spinks, and she said, I'm going to help you. I'm with you all the way. Well, we wound up having a wonderful project with 21 volunteers that Mrs. Spinks almost single-handedly got the housing for. And so we had a wonderful freedom school. We even branched off and had a freedom daycare center, which I
Wow.
think we might have been the only one in the state.
Yeah.
And we also organized a vibrant Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. We set up our mock elections. You're talking about learning, flying by the seat of your pants. That's what Jimmy Garrett and I did to bring that project online.
Yeah.
It was an amazing experience, frightening, scary. You know, the first office school firebombed, and the fire department sat there and let it burn. They wouldn't even put it out. You know, we were constantly being threatened, calls all night to people's homes, threatening them. Yeah, we experienced all the horrors of what it meant to be working for civil rights in Mississippi.
Yeah. Well, we could spend the rest of our time on those
Yeah.
2 years in Mississippi, but you
Yes.
you went from that to a project in Atlanta,
Mhm.
SNCC headquartered in Atlanta,
Right.
but there wasn't really much in the way of direct action there. But you and another SNCC worker were tasked with developing an Atlanta project.
Yes. And the Atlanta project grew directly out of the Julian Bond re-election campaign. In fact, I was asked by Jim Foreman, who was the executive secretary of SNCC, to come and work with others to get Julian re-elected. Julian, who was the communications director for SNCC, who was a longtime Atlanta resident. His father was very well-known professor there at Atlanta University. SNCC had decided to make some forays into electoral politics, and they were going to start there in Atlanta with a very large Black community, and they thought that they should run somebody like Julian. So this was not Julian wanting to be in politics. In fact, he was very resistant, but he was talked into it. So he's elected, but when he goes to take his seat at the state legislature, they say, no, you're a communist. And they use the fact that SNCC had issued a statement against the war in Vietnam. And he, as communications director, had sent sent the statement out to the press with a cover letter with his signature. So they used that to say that a duly elected state rep could not take his seat. So SNCC then organizes the Julian Bond reelection campaign. And we are in the heart of his district in in an area of Atlanta called Vine City, which was possibly one of the poorest areas in his district. And we certainly got him reelected, even though they wouldn't seat him after he was elected twice. He had to go to the Supreme Court. But out of that work, we developed the Atlanta project of SNCC. And of course, we started working on the housing and the terrible conditions that the people lived in the Vine City area. Housing and education were the initial things that we focused on.
And that that project in some ways laid the groundwork for the idea of black empowerment
Mhm.
that it really, what the Black community needed was to feel itself empowered.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that,
Yes, yes, it's a couple of things happened at the same time. The Atlanta project of SNCC, as I know mentioned, was in the heart of a very, very poor community called Vine City. And we uh, saw in a way that I guess I certainly had not seen in Mississippi in a more rural area. Here is a Black community. They can vote, they can run for office, but they still are extremely downtrodden, impoverished, and lacking a sense of their own power.
mm-hmm,
And so the Atlanta Project people, we began a series of conversations amongst ourselves that we recorded. We had a big clunky Wallensock tape recorder that we sat in the middle and we sat around it and we talked about our experiences. And a couple of the Atlanta Project staff members, Michael Simmons and Dwight Williams, had just come from Arkansas, where they had been SNCC workers there. The project director was Bill Ware, who was from Mississippi, but had had lots of experience in the military and living in Minnesota, et cetera. And then we had local uh, Atlanta people who joined us. Anyway, we started talking about what does it take for a community to feel empowered, to unlearn all of the things that make you feel inferior. And out of that, we began to suggest that in many ways we were like a liberation movement within the United States,
uh-huh,
very much like what we were seeing in Africa and Latin America. And that a big part of that meant that Black people had to unambiguously be the leaders of
mm-hmm,
their movement. And the movement had to come from them and their ideas, not be imported from without. Now, this was a problem because the main office of SNCC, the headquarters, many of the people who had gone to Mississippi to work in Mississippi summer and beyond were now working in the main office, and they were our comrades, our colleagues, and they were white. And so when we started saying, this is a problem because Black people see you all as the leaders and that we are the followers. This was a very difficult thing, but we wrote up what we had come up with, and somehow it got to the New York Times, and they said it was the ideological perspective to Black power. Because while this is going on, Stokely Carmichael is in Mississippi on a march that he, Dr. King, and others took up, and he says that phrase, Black power. Now, I had never heard the phrase until I read about it and learned about it. And then all these young Black people in Mississippi started saying Black power. Whereas we used to say, what do you want? And we'd say freedom. He started saying, what do you want? And the kids would say Black power. And so those two things converged. What we were working on, totally separate from what Stokely was thinking about and working on there in Mississippi. And that was quite a rough time for us in SNCC, because here were many of our white comrades who had put their lives on the line just as we had, who felt deep hurt that they thought, you're pushing us out of our movement. This is our movement too. And we were saying, what you need to do is to go into the white community. and organize. We can't do that. And the racism and discrimination and all is emanating from the white community. So you must go there to do the education there while we do the education in the Black community, and the two groups then can come together. But, it didn't get communicated like that. Black Power was, castigated. It was as bad as the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, all this madness that came about as a result of that one phrase, Black Power, and not being translated as the empowerment of a people. Because this is what, when you're trying to get people registered to vote, this is to give them power, but it was never talked about in that way. And so the words put together, Black and Power, was seen as a frightening concept by many, including, the head of the NAACP, who really castigated us terribly, and we lost a lot of support, financial support, because of the whole Black Power thing.
Mm. I wish we could go another hour, but
It's a
no,
lot to tell.
we've set some parameters. Yeah, you're still in your 20s. Oh,
60 years ago, right? Wow. Yeah.
oh, but you know, you and Michael married, moved to Philadelphia, involved with the American Friends Service Committee. You did some really interesting sounding work in various aspects of that, including pushing that noble institution to
Yeah.
live up to its nobility.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, yes.
It's one of those things about institutions that all of us who are involved need to remember. Okay, we're not always as good as our
Yes.
verbiage.
Yes,
Sometimes we need to work at
exactly.
catching up with where we say we are.
Yes.
I don't want to end the conversation without giving opportunity for you to talk about becoming Zoharah.
Oh, right. Oh my goodness. Yes, I can't believe it's almost 8:30. Oh wow. This is unbelievable. Okay. Well, the I was, as I have stated, I was brought up in the church, a deeply religious environment that was a big part of my life. But I had questions, about spirituality beyond that. And a couple came to work with us in the Atlanta project, and they were the first people who mentions meditation. And I said, well, what is meditation? And they kind of were a little bit embarrassed. They didn't want to draw attention to themselves, but every evening they disappear. And I said, well, where do you all go? And they said, well, we go to meditate. And as it turned out, they had studied with a teacher from India, and I wanted to know all about it. Plus, they were vegetarians. They were the first vegetarians that I'd ever met in my life. And I was like, y'all don't eat meat? Why? So anyway, rushing on, they said, they introduced me to Paramahansa Yogananda, and his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. And I read that book, and something just opened up. I felt like he was in the room present with me, taking me through many of his experiences and understandings. It was like a door opened that I had not had opened. Well, in addition to that, and we didn't even get into the whole Vietnam work that Michael, and anti-Vietnam War work And I know, and so, but a person, Michael went to prison. He was sentenced to 3.5 years, did 2.5 for refusing to fight in Vietnam, and met a Sufi who was in prison there, who turned his whole library over to Michael. And a part of that was the collected works of Hazrat Khan. Well, here again, another door opens. After that, I am taking a yoga class. I'm told about a Sufi teacher who is coming to the United States. And I was asked, would I like to go to the airport to meet him with a small group? And I said, yes. And so M.R. Bawa Mahayadeen comes to the United States. I meet him with 10 or 12 other people at the airport. And I spend the next 17 years studying with him. And he gave me the name Zoharah. And that's a major part of my life, still is, as a founding member of the M.R. Bawa Mahayadeen Fellowship and Mosque there in Philadelphia. We have chapters in many other cities. And so Sufism is now a big part of my life. And this is one of the reasons I did my doctorate in Islamic studies, because I wanted to understand the connection between the mystical stream in Islam and what people would call, Orthodox Islam.
Yeah.
That's so many years into what, 5 minutes, but yes, impossible.
Oh,
But that's the
thank,
origin of Zohara.
yeah.
He named me that, and I use it.
Thank you so much for this time. And I am sure people see why I enjoy picking up the phone and talking with you about whatever.
Yes,
In the background, you can see this book, which is about Zohara and
Mike.
Michael,
Yeah,
and I believe it's available through the Living Legacy bookstore. So
wonderful.
also mention that Living Legacy Project does have a March pilgrimage coming up to the South Carolina, Georgia Low Country, and perhaps Annette Marquis will say a word or two more about that as we transition from this. But thank you so much,
Thank you.
Zohara.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Zoharah and Gordon. Just incredible program. And you're right. I mean, we could have 5 more hours and just be spellbound by the stories and just incredible gift and richness that you bring to us. Thank you. Thank you so, so much. I want to thank all of you who listened to this program tonight and watched this program. As I mentioned earlier, the Living Legacy Project is a nonprofit organization, and we're committed to inspiring today's work for racial justice by taking people to the South to meet people involved in the civil rights movement. Our latest addition to our itineraries is a program that will happen in March to also know that your support of our work, your presence here, your financial support allow us to continue to bring the great programs like this and also to reach into other communities, particularly colleges and universities, where we really have a passion for making sure that these stories live on. We look forward to seeing all of you on October 27th for the final program in this series, in which we'll focus on the late Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, a civil rights activist who played a critical role as a legal consultant and scholar to the movement. We hope to see you there. It's going to be a very exciting program to learn about Dr. Murray. And we also hope to see you in the discussion room in a few minutes. Pam has posted the link in the chat. As soon as this meeting ends, we'll hop over there, and you're welcome to continue this conversation and ask your questions that you have. Thank you again. But before you go, I believe we have another opportunity to hear from our very own Reggie Harris. So take it away, Reggie.
What a powerful, inspiring night this has been, and we have another 30 minutes, so we hope you will join us. These are the stories that connect us to not only our past, but to our purpose. And certainly, the stories that we hear through these wonderful sharings prepare us to allow our light to shine. So, in the words of one of the most favored songs of the civil rights movement, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Well, I'm not gonna make it shine. No, I'm just gonna let it shine. Hey, I'm not gonna make it shine. No, I'm just gonna let it shine. I'm not gonna make it shine. Well, just gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, well, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Be well, keep the faith, and keep on working. Thank you.